I never thought the place I called home would become my biggest nightmare. They said it was just community rules. But when those rules were used to take away my peace, my money, and nearly my house, I realized it wasn't about rules at all. It was about power, and I was about to fight back. When I first moved into Maple Grove Estates, I was just happy to finally own something that felt like mine. A small two-story house with a white porch, blue shutters, and a maple tree in the front yard. After years of renting and saving, I could finally call it home. My daughter, Emma, was 7, and every evening she'd draw with chalk on the driveway while I watered the flowers. Life felt simple, calm. Then, one afternoon, I found a letter taped to my door. A fine from the HOA. Apparently, my mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. I laughed it off, thinking it was a joke. Who even notices something like that? But a week later, another notice came. This time, a $150 fine. The letterhead was bold, almost threatening. Non-compliance will result in further action. That was my first real taste of the HOA. The next few months were a blur of small, ridiculous violations. Grass too long, trash cans visible, holiday lights up too early. Every time, a fine followed. I paid the first 2, thinking maybe it would stop, but it didn't. The moment I questioned it, they doubled down. I started noticing a woman walking by my house almost every morning, taking photos, clipboard in hand, expression stiff as stone. Her name was Linda, the HOA president. She had that air of someone who believed she owned the whole neighborhood. One morning, I finally asked, "Can I help you with something?" She didn't even look up. "Just making sure everyone follows the rules," she said sharply. "We like things neat around here." That's when I realized this wasn't about neat. It was about control. By summer, my fines had totaled nearly $900. I tried appealing, but every email went unanswered. When I finally attended an HOA meeting, Linda and her board acted like I wasn't even there. They called my concerns emotional and said I should be more cooperative if I wanted to live in a nice community. I felt humiliated, but something inside me clicked that night. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore, so I started documenting everything. The letters, the emails, even photos of other homes breaking the same rules I was fined for. My next-door neighbor, for example, had a red mailbox. Another had their trash cans out front all week. No fines, no letters. The difference? They were on the board's good side. By early fall, I was behind on payments. Between HOA fees and fines, I owed almost $1,400. And then came the letter. The one that changed everything. Final notice: property lien will be filed within 14 days due to unpaid HOA assessments. A lien. They were threatening to take my home over mailbox paint and garbage cans. My hands shook as I read it. I sat on the porch, staring at my daughter's chalk drawings fading on the driveway, and felt a mix of rage and disbelief. That night, I called a lawyer, but he told me the same thing everyone did. HOAs have more power than people realize. They can legally foreclose for unpaid dues. I barely slept. Every noise outside felt like a threat. The next morning, when Emma asked, "Mom, why are you sad?" I smiled and said, "I'm not. I'm just thinking." But deep down, I was terrified. Then, a small thing happened that changed my direction. I ran into my neighbor, Dan, one of the older residents. He leaned closer and whispered, "You're not the first one, you know. Linda's done this before. She fined the Millers until they moved. Said it was for community standards." That's when I knew I wasn't alone. That evening, I started knocking on doors. Quietly, carefully, I asked if anyone else had issues with the HOA. What started as curiosity turned into a pattern. Almost half the people I spoke to had similar stories. Fines that didn't make sense. Warnings that felt personal. Meetings where they weren't allowed to speak. By the end of that week, I had a stack of testimonies and photos. It was bigger than me now. It was a pattern of abuse. When I tried presenting this to the HOA board, Linda smirked. "You think you can challenge us? Honey, you signed the agreement when you moved here. You belong to this association." Her words hit like a slap. Belong. Like I was property, not a person. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by letters, fines, and screenshots. I stared at my laptop, tears welling up from anger and exhaustion. Then I remembered something Dan said. They count on you being quiet. Not anymore. I started writing a post, not a rant, but a story. I detailed everything. The fines, the threats, the photos, the neighbors' experiences. I didn't name names, but I shared the truth. I hit post and shut my laptop. By morning, it had hundreds of shares. People from other neighborhoods commented, "This happened to me too." One comment stood out. "Local news covers HOA abuse stories. You should contact them." So I did. When the reporter called me, her first words were, "We've been looking into cases like yours. Would you be willing to talk on record?" I hesitated for maybe a second. Then I said, "Yes." That one word changed everything. The next few days were chaos. The camera crew came to my street. Neighbors peeked through windows. Linda tried to stop the shoot, yelling that it was private property. The reporter calmly replied, "We're on a public sidewalk, ma'am." For the first time, Linda didn't have control. I could see it in her eyes. When they asked me to tell my story, I looked right into the camera and said, "They tried to take my home, but I fought back, and I meant every word." The night after the interview aired, I didn't sleep a single minute. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, calls, and notifications pouring in from people I hadn't talked to in years. Some were neighbors whispering their support. Others were strangers from across the state saying, "Thank you for standing up." But the one call that made my heart race was from the HOA office itself. It was Linda. Her voice was sharp, furious, and trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed. "You've made us look like criminals on television." I took a breath, calm but firm. "I didn't make you look like anything, Linda. You did that yourself." There was silence for a second, then a click. She hung up. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Some people avoided eye contact when I walked by. Others smiled and whispered, "Good for you." The tension was thick, like the whole place was holding its breath. That evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Dan, the same neighbor who'd warned me earlier. He handed me a folded newspaper. My story was front-page local news. The headline read, "Homeowner battles HOA over unfair fines, says they tried to take her home." I couldn't believe it. The photo was of me standing by my porch, arms crossed, determination on my face. It felt surreal, but with attention came retaliation. The very next day, I found another violation notice on my door. This time, they claimed my garden decorations were unauthorized. I laughed bitterly. They weren't even trying to hide their revenge anymore. That evening, I went online. And what I saw both shocked and fueled me. The HOA's official Facebook page had turned off comments after hundreds of people flooded their posts with angry messages. "Shame on you! How dare you treat homeowners like this? We're with her!" Linda must have been seething. A week later, the local news team contacted me again. "We're getting a lot of responses about your story," the reporter said. "Would you be open to a follow-up interview?" I agreed, of course. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been bullied by their own HOA. The second interview was bigger, longer, deeper, more emotional. I sat in front of my house again, this time with a few of my neighbors beside me. Each one shared their story. Fines for minor details, threats for missing meetings, letters with aggressive language. The reporter's expression shifted from curiosity to outrage. When the piece aired, It wasn't just local anymore. It went statewide. Thousands watched. Comments flooded in. HOAs are out of control. This woman's a hero. About time someone spoke up. But behind all that praise, there was still fear. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Members only. They wanted to address the misinformation. I knew I had to go. When I entered the room, everyone turned to look at me. It was like walking into a lion's den. The board sat in a row, Linda in the center, jaw tight and eyes cold. She started with a smile, the fake kind that hides venom. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. Miller," she said sweetly. "We're all very concerned about how your statements have misrepresented our community." I didn't blink. I didn't misrepresent anything. I told the truth. Linda's smile cracked. "You've caused damage to the association's reputation." "Maybe the association should stop damaging people's lives," I cut in. Gasps echoed through the room. Some homeowners nodded discreetly. Others looked terrified. The meeting escalated fast. Linda raised her voice, accusing me of slander, creating chaos, even inciting hostility. I just stood there, calm, letting her dig her own grave. When she was done ranting, I placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed copies of all the fines, emails, ignored appeals, and photos showing other houses violating the same rules without punishment. "This isn't chaos," I said. "This is proof." The room fell silent. For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Then, one of the board members, an older man named Carl, cleared his throat. "She's right," he muttered. "We haven't been consistent," Linda snapped. "Carl, that's not the point." He looked at her, then back at me. Maybe it should be. That's when I realized the tide was starting to turn. The next morning, the reporter emailed me again. "We've had thousands of views and dozens of HOA complaints from across the state. We're doing a full investigative piece. We'd like to feature your story as the lead." My hands shook as I typed my response. "Yes, let's do it." Within days, the news team was back, this time with a full production crew. Cameras, lights, interviews with neighbors, and even footage of Linda refusing to comment. The story was turning into something much bigger than a local feud. It was becoming a symbol, but not everyone was happy. One night, I noticed tire tracks on my lawn. Deep ones, like someone had driven up deliberately. My mailbox was bent, the flag snapped off. For the first time in months, fear crept back in. I called the police. They filed a report, but I knew nothing would come of it. Still, I refused to back down. "They can't scare me," I told myself. When the full documentary aired 2 weeks later, it was everywhere, on YouTube, Facebook, even national morning shows. The title read, "Homeowner Fights Back, the HOA that went too far." My face filled the screen as I said, "They tried to take my home, but I fought back." It felt like justice. Then something incredible happened. I started getting messages from people all over the country. California, Texas, Florida. Homeowners who'd been through the same thing. They were forming online groups, sharing advice, organizing petitions. My story had started a movement. Even the mayor's office took notice. They announced plans to review HOA regulations citywide, ensuring transparency and limits on foreclosure powers. It felt unreal. I had gone from being bullied by a local HOA to standing in front of cameras, representing thousands of people's frustrations. But I wasn't done yet. The HOA tried one last desperate move. They sent me a cease and desist letter claiming defamation. My lawyer laughed. "They can't sue you for telling the truth," he said. "If anything, they should be worried about their own exposure." I felt relief. And power. Real, hard-earned power. A week later, Linda resigned for personal reasons. The board voted to restructure the HOA leadership entirely. I still remember walking past her house the next morning. Her blinds were shut tight. The woman who once ruled over everyone with fear was now hiding from the same neighbors she used to control. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt quiet. The good kind of quiet. Kids played outside again. People smiled when they passed me. Someone even left a small note on my porch that said, "Thank you for fighting for all of us." I kept it on my fridge, but I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I wanted to make sure what happened to me could never happen to anyone else again. That's when I got an idea. One that would take everything to a whole new level. And it all started with one phone call from a national TV network. That morning, I woke up before the sun. The world was still wrapped in silence, the kind that makes your heart beat louder in your chest. My coffee sat untouched on the kitchen counter as I stared out the window at my lawn. The same lawn that had started all of this chaos. The same grass, they'd said, was non-compliant, unacceptable, a stain on the neighborhood's image. It looked so peaceful now, dew shining under the faint glow of dawn. Hard to believe something so small could lead to a war. I had spent weeks collecting everything, every email, every photo, every threat masked as policy enforcement. The HOA thought they had the upper hand. They thought I'd fold under pressure, like so many before me. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. They had already taken my peace. They weren't taking my home. By 8 a.m., I was in my car, driving to the courthouse. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, the papers on the passenger seat fluttering every time I took a deep breath. My heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Resolve. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw them, the entire HOA board, standing near the entrance, laughing like it was a casual day out. Karen, their president, wore her signature beige jacket and that same fake smile she'd used when she handed me the first fine notice. Behind her stood Mark, the treasurer, and Linda, who had once been my neighbor and friend before she decided the rules mattered more than decency. I stepped out of my car slowly, holding my evidence binder tight. Karen turned and smiled. "Morning, dear. Ready to make this official?" Her tone dripped with condescension. I looked her straight in the eye. "I've been ready since the day you trespassed on my property." Her smile faltered for the first time. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. The judge, a calm, composed woman in her 50s, sat at the bench, scanning through the file in front of her. The HOA's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, stood confidently at the table beside them. "Let's begin," the judge said. The HOA lawyer went first. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The defendant has repeatedly violated community codes regarding property maintenance, aesthetic uniformity, and compliance. The HOA has made numerous attempts to resolve these matters amicably, but she continues to resist." He made it sound so polite, so rational, like they hadn't stalked me, threatened me, and tried to bankrupt me over some paint colors and flowers. When it was my turn, I stood up and faced the judge. My palms were sweating, but I didn't care. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't about a lawn. This isn't about compliance. This is about harassment. About an HOA that forgot its purpose is to protect, not control." The lawyer snorted quietly. "Objection! Sustained!" The judge cut him off, raising her hand. "Let her speak," I continued, opening my binder. "This is a photo of Karen Smith's property taken last month. Notice her backyard shed, painted bright red, which violates Section 4A of the same HOA rules they're accusing me of breaking." Karen stiffened in her seat. I flipped another page. This is an email from Mark Williams, the HOA treasurer, where he says, and I quote, "We should make an example out of her before others start thinking they can ignore us too." The courtroom went silent. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I didn't stop. "And this," I said, pulling out a USB drive, "is video evidence from my security camera. It shows two HOA board members entering my backyard without permission, shining flashlights into my windows, and taking photos. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have a timestamp?" "Yes, Your Honor. The night of June 5th, 11:48 p.m. Karen looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. The lawyer tried to recover. "Your Honor, that could have been—" "It's her own security footage," I interrupted. "They had no right to enter my property. That's trespassing." The judge nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Miss Smith, would you like to explain this?" Karen's lips trembled. "We were ensuring compliance." "By sneaking into her yard in the middle of the night?" The judge asked sharply. "That's not compliance. That's intimidation." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear Karen's breathing grow shallow. I took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I'm a single mother. I work 2 jobs. I pay my dues. I follow the law. But these people, they made my life miserable. They sent inspectors to my home 3 times a week. They fined me for flowers. Flowers, Your Honor. They told me my daughter's playhouse wasn't aesthetic enough. And when I spoke up, they retaliated." My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "They tried to take my home. They wanted to scare me into selling so they could prove a point, but I wasn't going anywhere." For a long moment, the judge just stared at me. Then she turned to the HOA's lawyer. "Do you have anything else to add?" He hesitated, flipping through his notes, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Good," she said, "because I've heard enough." Her voice was calm but sharp, like a blade. "I've seen HOAs misuse power before, but this is excessive. The court finds that the defendant was unfairly targeted, harassed, and subjected to unlawful trespassing. The HOA's claim is dismissed." "Effective immediately," Karen gasped. The lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand again. "Additionally," she continued, "the HOA will cover the defendant's legal expenses and issue a formal written apology within 30 days. If they fail to comply, further legal action will be taken." When the gavel hit the desk, my knees nearly gave out. I'd won. After months of stress, fear, and humiliation, I'd finally won. As I walked out of the courtroom, I saw the HOA board still sitting there in stunned silence. Karen wouldn't even look at me. For the first time, she didn't have the power anymore. I did. Outside, the local news crew was waiting. They had followed the story for weeks, and now the cameras were all pointed at me. "How does it feel to beat the HOA?" the reporter asked, holding out a microphone. I smiled. A real one this time. "It feels like freedom," I said. This wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who's ever been bullied by the people who were supposed to protect them. The video went viral. Millions of people watched it. Messages poured in from all over. People thanking me for standing up, for proving that ordinary people could fight back and win. Weeks later, the HOA board quietly resigned. Karen moved out of the neighborhood altogether. The new board that took over actually listened to residents. They started treating people with respect again. And my house, my beautiful little home that almost got taken from me, it became a symbol. Neighbors started planting flowers again, painting fences in colors they liked. The fear was gone. One evening, I sat on my porch swing with my daughter, the sun setting behind the houses. She looked up at me and said, "Mom, we did it." I smiled. "Yeah, baby, we really did." And as the golden light faded and laughter echoed down the street, I realized something. Sometimes standing up for your home isn't about walls, or paint, or lawns. It's about standing up for yourself, because when they try to take what's yours, you fight back. And when you fight for what's right, you win more than a house. You win your freedom.